Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'll tell you what, today's guest is one that when I saw him on our production calendar, I went deep into his work and I was just like, holy cow, this is going to make for an amazing session, because at the root of so much of what today's guest is all about, it's all about reimagine and then reinvent, which is a cycle that we must go on in our business journey so many times. It's about taking that giant step back and questioning everything. I love entrepreneurs and experts who have that approach. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Anthony Gindin. Over the past 23 years, Anthony has built 6 companies, published 2 books, spoken at events around the world, worked with executive leaders in 17 countries, and he's been recognized with 11 international marketing awards. During COVID, Anthony co-founded 2 e-commerce companies, both of which went public within a year. Then after exiting both of those companies, Anthony returned to the consulting world as founder and CEO of Futurecraft Consulting. Today, Anthony helps other founders and CEOs reinvent their businesses for better growth. I also want to tell you, because this is an exciting time, Anthony's for sure going to talk about it at the end of today's session. He also just launched a new book called The Agency Secret, where he shares his extensive experience in the agency world, providing a model to transform and scale the world's best agencies. We're all going to learn a lot, myself included, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview today with Anthony Gindin. All right, Anthony, I'm so pumped that you're here. Welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks a lot, Brian. I'm very excited to be here.
Heck yeah. So obviously you heard me tease listeners a little bit about your background, but they always love hearing the backstory from the guests themselves. Give us that story. How the heck did you end up doing all these awesome things that you're doing? How did you end up here?
Well, it's always funny when you hear someone else kind of give your bio, right? It's like, wow, there's a lot there. I think, I'll try to go pretty quick because there's a lot to the story, I think. And, I started very young doing entrepreneurial stuff. In my mid-20s, I decided I wanted to go corporate because I thought, the experience of working in a larger corporate environment would be useful. And I would say for any entrepreneur, it is good to have a corporate stint. It'll teach you a lot about how the world of business operates. So I was corporate for about 10 years. I actually started on the agency side, and then I went back to the client side. I ended up living in Europe for a while, sort of cutting my teeth in the very intense international business world. I was living in Brussels, Belgium. I was doing business in China and the US and Australia. It was sort of a 24/7 kind of a thing. It was super intense, but I learned a lot. Then I came back to Canada, went back to the agency world, and I worked at an agency called ThinkShift, which was a multinational ad agency in Winnipeg, Canada, which is where I live. And yeah, basically I took over sales and marketing there. At the time, the company was doing about $3.5 million in annual revenue. And we built an entirely new sales and marketing program, grew it to about 14 million in 3 years. So massive growth. And that was when I first started to get the confidence to say, I think I want to go out on my own. I think I have something to offer here. And sort of my corporate swan song was closing a $15 million deal in Switzerland against all odds, up against some of the best agencies in the world. And that was really what gave me the final push to leave the corporate world and never go back. So, that's kind of, I just summarized about 15 years there very quickly. But, in more recent times, after I left, I started Futurecraft Consulting, with the idea of helping, sort of larger B2B organizations build incredible brands and then build high-performing sales and marketing ecosystems. So at that time, I published my first book, The Modern Sales and Marketing Ecosystem. And that was a little over 3 years ago. And it's amazing how out of date that book is now, because the world of marketing has changed so much in the past 3 years. It's absolutely insane. And so I started Futurecraft. I was doing the consulting thing, but I had an itch to do something more in the startup world, something scalable. And I got in touch with an old friend of mine, Corey Zellickson, a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. And his entire family is vegan, and they sort of had this idea about starting an online marketplace for vegan vitamins and supplements. The more we got talking, we kind of realized that there was really no such thing as like a vegan Amazon, like an online marketplace for everything vegan. And that was kind of when I got more heavily involved. He already had a couple partners, and I sort of took over the brand development side of it and came up with the idea of Veggie, which is VEJII, and it's kind of a made up word, but we set out to create sort of the largest online marketplace for vegan products in the world. Very quickly became one of the largest marketplaces for vegan products after it launched. We started in the US, went into Canada, the UK. Company went public within a year. That was an awesome experience. I exited out of that. Immediately got in touch with a couple of venture capital guys in Vancouver who had a separate idea to create a plant-based gummy company. I got involved there and kind of shifted that concept into more of a cause-driven brand called the Gummy Project, which was low-sugar plant-based gummies, each one in the shape of an endangered keystone species. Every bag you purchase triggers a donation to a conservation group that supports that endangered species. So that was a really fun brand. We launched that, took off. It went public very fast. Ended up in Safeway and Sobeys and Whole Foods and on an airline and in the Four Seasons and the Fairmont hotels. We were in the Wynn Encore hotels in Vegas, so that was a really exciting time as well. Exited out of that, and now I've decided I just want to shift back into the coaching and consulting world and kind of just stay there for now. Startup life is crazy. I kind of want to take a break from that. Not sure if I'll do another one, but I really want to kind of send the elevator back down, as I like to say. I really just like helping other founders and other business leaders to grow their business and build up their brands. And so that brings me to today, where I do a lot of things. I work with everything from startups to large companies, but my real niche focus is on working with agencies. Any type of marketing agency, even a research agency, digital marketing, social media, whatever it might be. Working with the agency principals, helping them kind of take a step back, as you said, reimagine and then reinvent, how they can get to a place where they can scale their business consistently, 20% plus growth year over year. That's kind of the goal I like to work towards with my clients. So my new book actually isn't out yet. It's very close. It's called The Agency Secret. You can go to theagencysecret.com and sign up on the waiting list. It's going to be out within like a month, so it's very close. And anyone who's on the waiting list there at theagencysecret.com will get special early access to the book as well.
Yeah, Anthony, I love that overview because you just took us in such a short story. You took us across so many different industries, so many different business models, so many different business sizes. I love hearing that overview because for me, as someone who's gone deep into researching your work ahead of today's session, the one word that kept bubbling to the surface is repeatable growth. And when I see that, whether you're talking about, gosh, that's so creative, by the way, the gummy idea for each endangered species, that's such a cool idea. But whether you're talking about gummies, whether you're talking about a vegan marketplace, whether you're talking about agency models, whether you're talking about big business, your experience there as well, it is that repeatable growth. And Anthony, I feel like that's the one thing that's lacking within the world of entrepreneurship is we're really good at hyper focusing on, hey, here's how you get Facebook ads to work. Here's how you can focus in on your SEO. But what people avoid is that, hey, what's the overall system? How do all these things interact with each other to provide that repeatable growth? Where do we even start when we want to start talking about, one, the system, and two, obviously the end result we're all searching for, which is repeatable growth?
Perfect question. The tagline for my consulting is systemize repeatable growth. There's multiple layers to that. There's the systemization component, which in today's world, that is the most important thing, is to have a systemized approach and then to repeat it every day. So that's why you systemize the repeatable growth. So where do you start? One thing I've been talking a lot about to business owners recently is this idea of the elusive magic bullet. Now, one of the problems today is that, you scroll through Instagram and you are bombarded by marketing gurus, I'll put that in quotations, who are essentially just selling snake oil. They're promising all sorts of magical systems, right? It's, we're going to 10x this and 20x that and everything's, how many X's do you want? We're going to, but the truth is there is no magic system. There's no magic solution. There's no simple, quick thing. You just plug this in and boom, you're going to, 3x your business. It just doesn't really work that way. You need to look at things holistically and you need to put in the work. And where does that begin? I would say the first thing, and this is more of a fundamental leadership thing, is intentionality. And I can tell you from having worked with so many businesses, big ones, small ones, successful ones, so many businesses lack intentionality among the leadership team. It's incredible. A former colleague of mine, Dr. Balaji Krishnamurthy, used to say, intentionality is the ability to step out of your body, metaphorically, and examine yourself, asking the question, how would I like things to be? Then returning to your body to make those things happen. Now, if you look at that in a business context, that's something businesses don't do often enough. They don't actually take a step back and look at things holistically. How do I want this to be across every aspect of the business? Now let's make it so. Part of the reason that doesn't happen is called incrementalism. And another great quote from Nicholas Negroponte, he says, incrementalism is innovation's worst enemy. Now, the way most companies approach change is, every year they kind of decide on maybe 3 big things they want to update or change, new website, update the brand, work on our culture, whatever it might be. And then they proceed to tackle those things throughout the year. At the end of the year, they've only completed 2 out of the 3 things. They carry the unfinished one over to next year, add 2 new things, repeat the same process. And it's just a hamster wheel to nowhere town. It is impossible to get ahead when that's how you approach change, because your internal pace of change can never mirror the external pace of change happening in the world around you, which continues to go faster and faster. So you just have this list of things you want to change that gets bigger and bigger each year, essentially. So, at some point, you have to take a step back and map a holistic change process. Now, if you're a startup that's just starting out, that's a bit different, right? You can be intentional from the start. But if you're a business that's already been doing it for a while, and maybe you're not achieving the growth you want to achieve, you need to have a process where once every 3 to 5 years, you take a step back and you are willing to change everything. You look at everything, you analyze it, you map out where things need to change, how everything needs to fit together to be better aligned. And then you execute that change within a single fiscal year. So you go absolutely ham, you execute the change within a single fiscal year, and then you go back to an incremental approach for 3 to 5 years. And then you do it again in another 3 to 5 years. And that is how the best organizations today stay ahead of the curve. So that's kind of the broader leadership perspective on how to consider change, how to stay relevant. Now, if you were to go a layer down from that into, okay, from a systemization standpoint, what do we need to be doing? The single most important thing you can do, I would say, is to start with who. Now, everyone knows Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Fantastic book. I do agree that every company should be driven by a clear and compelling purpose. What I don't agree with is that you should start with why. I think you first need to start with who. I like to say that your customer's voice is essentially your compass. It is the thing that you have to follow if you want to get where you're going. There really is no other compass. Your customer's voice is the one thing that should guide you. And I think what most companies fail to do is to actually listen to their customers. A lot of companies, they have a need they've identified, which they kind of just think is a need, like they're pretty sure it's a need. And then they come up with a service or a product, and then they start branding around it and they start to present, and they're already 10 miles down the road. They haven't even actually really talked to anyone yet or listened. So listening to, first of all, defining who your dream customer, dream client is, but then actually listening to them and actually investing time and really finding those people, asking questions and listening is the single most important thing any business can do. And I'll tell a quick funny story about that. So there was a film that came out in 1903 called The Great Train Robbery. And it was the first film ever to show credits. And they showed the credits at the beginning of the film. And that then kind of launched this standard process where all films showed credits at the beginning of the film. And that lasted for about 90 years until the mid 1990s, when film started to finally change that. Now, in that 90-year span, it was very clear that the people who watched movies did not want to see those credits. It was boring. It was a waste of time. They when the VCR was invented, we can finally forward through this, right? And that is a perfect example of an industry that completely failed to listen to their customers. I mean, it's just one of the most insane examples that they could keep doing that for 90 years when people clearly didn't want to see it, right? I mean, who cares about all these random names? The guy who did this, the guy who did that. I mean, all you know is the director and the top two actors, right? I mean, all these, then they show 30 other names, right? You sit there for 10 minutes. So, that's a good example I like to use of an entire industry that failed to listen to their customers for a very long time. So, the first and most important thing is to start with who, and to not only understand your customer, but to really listen to them, and then to have a mechanism for continuing to listen to them over time. I call this customer inclusion. So even when you're 5 years into your business, 10, 15, 20, excuse me, you need to have a process to listen to your customers. So if you're going through that holistic change process every 3 to 5 years, you're taking a step back, you're looking at your business, you're thinking things through, go take 2 or 3 of your best customers, bring them into a meeting, literally bring them into a strategy meeting, or just call them to discuss, we're going through this process. Here's what we're challenged with. I appreciate your input so much. Our whole business is built around serving people like you. I want you to help us make these strategic decisions about our future. Actually include them in the process. It's one of the most powerful things you can ever do, not only in terms of getting the valuable insights around what you should be doing with your business, but also it'll forge much deeper relationships with those big customers. So I can go on, but maybe I'll throw it back to you, Brian, for a moment there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Anthony, it's actually the first time I've heard anyone talk about the concept of incrementalism. And my natural question to you really was, well, what's the antidote to incrementalism? But I think that you already illuminated that, which is literal, like total destruction, essentially. Knock down everything and rebuild it. And that's where obviously the reimagine then reinvent comes in. And obviously there are good parts to that structure. We're not just going to completely bulldoze our entire businesses and necessarily start from scratch. That's why I love hearing you talk about the holistic change process, because so much of what you do and the way that you think, Anthony, I think it reveals a lot in your answers, is you always do think about these things as a process. The question where I want to go from here, though, is just, I don't know. I love using examples on the fly of things that are around me. And right now I'm just looking at the room around me here in the podcasting studio. And in my head, I'm just like, if I wanted to revamp, let's say, this structure around me, I don't even know what goes into it, Anthony. Like, I can see the walls, but behind the walls, there's things that I don't even understand. There's electrical wires, there's plumbing, there's who knows what. I don't fully understand all of that. And I feel like that's part of the problem in business, is that we do get, whether it's a big business that has a lot of departments and employees, we fall into silos. The marketing team knows the marketing components, but the accounting team knows the financial side of things. But even on the small business level, so many of us small business entrepreneurs, we lose track of all the various components of that business and how they all interact with each other. So what part of this process is that first step of, hey, here's the ingredients, here's the checklist of things that we want to look at, here's the checklist of things we need to question, we need to be open to reimagining? How do we even start to take inventory of all these different aspects of what makes a business?
Yeah, good question. So there's 2 layers to it. First of all, there's the core stuff that really you need to change, that are going to be the bigger changes. Then there's all the extremities that surround it. Like you might make this big change and then realize, oh, we need to install a new accounting software or blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to get into like the extremity part. If we look at the core things that you need to consider when you go through a transformation, I would put it into 3 major components, kind of starting from the ground up. So the first component is your core business model. Okay. The second component is your market positioning. how you position that business model to the world. And then the third component is your client acquisition model or customer acquisition model, depending on whether you're a service or a product-based business, the terminology. But I mostly serve, B2B expertise providers, service-based businesses, agencies, coaches, consultants. So I will speak in the context of that. So business model, market positioning, and then client acquisition model. So starting at the core business model, this is where you need to kind of really, really take a step back. The problem is, and I'm going to sidestep for a second here to give some additional context. The problem is that most businesses, when they are not experiencing the growth that they want to achieve, what they do is they really just look at the client acquisition model. They shift around their sales and marketing tactics and systems, and they hope for a better result. They fail to recognize that the real problems are often far deeper. Sometimes they go one layer deeper from the client acquisition model into the market positioning. They start to think about their brand and how it's positioned, but that's usually as far as they go. They usually fail to recognize that you need to maybe go deeper down into the business model, because there's really two ways to look at it. There's what you sell, and then there's how you sell. So how you sell is, the hooks you throw out into the world to get the attention of your audience, the marketing that you use to kind of pull them in and develop a relationship, and then, the sales process you go through to try to close them as a customer, right? That's really just how you sell. And that's really where people put most of their focus. What they fail to do is go deeper to what you sell, right? This is who you serve, what you do, how you do it, and how you position that, right? And so that's just kind of a context I like to provide. Don't focus just on how you sell. If something isn't working, you can play with how you sell as long as you want, but you need to go deeper and really look at what you actually sell. So that's why we need to start at the level of the business model. And so, that's really where we take a step back and say, well, what are we actually doing here? Like, let's rethink, what kind of business do you actually want to have? Let's reconsider your core vision. Where are you really trying to go? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What market do you want to be in? What customers do you want to be serving? Who is your dream client? Okay, then what are the products and services you're providing to them? Do they still make sense? Are they still going to be relevant in 5 years? Do they match your vision, right? And then looking at that holistically and saying, well, is this a scalable model? Is it specialized enough? Is it too generalist? Are we going to be able to engage this audience? Can we go out and talk to them and actually understand if this model makes sense to them? If it's something that there's a lot of interest in, of course. And so that's kind of the core business model component. Then we go up a step to the market positioning component. And this isn't just about the brand. There's a lot more within this. So, again, I'm speaking in the context of a service business. You're helping people in some way, shape, or form. So first of all, what are the results that you are going to produce for this customer? And even if you're selling a product, I mean, that's still relevant, right? Like, if you buy a set of headphones, are the headphones going to drown out the outside sound and give you quality sound? Whatever it is, those are the results. Whatever it is you sell, what are the actual results that you're going to produce for that customer? And then what is the unique mechanism that you're going to use to produce that result? And that right there is a level of intentionality a lot of businesses haven't really defined. What are the actual results you're going to produce? What is the unique mechanism that makes you unique to produce those results? Because there's all sorts of other businesses out there that are producing this result. So you need to pair that result with a unique mechanism. And when you do that, you can then build what I like to call a client transformation story, which is a really compelling story about how you're going to transform your client or your customer's life for the better. Once you've done that, you have a really strong market positioning component, clear results, a clear unique mechanism. It's all wrapped in a really clear client transformation story that extends out into your broader narrative, your brand, your digital presence, and everything else that you do. But that's really the nucleus of your positioning. So again, business model, market positioning. Then we get into the client acquisition model. And that's really, how do you hook, how do you book and how do you close, right? And so if you're, doing any sort of B2B sales, How do you first hook your ideal client? Then how do you kind of book them into a meeting and enter them into your sales process? And how do you close them? That is where, it's very custom to the individual client and the individual business and what types of client or customers they're pursuing, what kind of outreach channels they want to use, et cetera. But if I were to say one overarching thing about what you need to develop a high-performing client acquisition model, it would be you need to have it highly systemized, and then you need to translate it into a repeatable process. So what I mean is, I'll use myself as an example. How do I get clients? I only use LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become the most powerful marketing tool today. It doesn't really matter what you're selling, everyone's there. And not only are they there, but they're defined as this is what I do, this is who I am, in a way that you can't really find on, Facebook or other platforms. It's who they are, what they do. It's very specific. And so that's the only channel I use. And I have a very clear system for how I reach out, how I develop new connections, how I nurture them along, how I try to get them into a meeting, how I demonstrate value through content. That has been systemized to a point where I've pared that down into what I call an SOP, right? It's a standard operating procedure. I actually call it a systemized outcome pathway because I have a clear outcome, which is to book meetings each week. And I have a pathway to get there, and I have a system. So that SOP, that systemized outcome pathway is been boiled down to a repeatable 90-minute daily task, which I actually am able to give to a VA to execute for me. And so as long as they execute that SOP, I get the meetings. And if something isn't working, we just go in and tweak a component of that SOP. And then, until it is working, right? And then for my sales process, when I have sales calls, I have an SOP for how to lead my first sales call versus my second sales call, et cetera. And then I have an SOP for how to onboard clients. And so that's that systemization component, having everything totally systemized so that when something isn't working, you just go in, you tweak the system, you tweak the SOP, and you do it until it's working. And then you just repeat it every single day. You just repeat the exact same thing. That is what systemized, repeatable growth looks like. You have a clear outreach process that you repeat. You have a clear sales process. Then once you get in, the tools that you use within that process, you have a clear client transformation story that is so well developed that you can just tell it over and over again. You get in, you have a clear process for how you work with clients, how you produce those results, and then it feeds back into the beginning because now you can share the results and share the stories so it's kind of a cycle there, right? So what I'm explaining is a very complex process. And, the point of going through that big holistic transformation is to work through an incredibly complex process so that you can land in a place of simplicity. Because complexity doesn't scale. But you need to fight through the complexity so you can land in a place of simplicity. So you can land in a place where you've went through all that stuff I just talked about. And believe me, I left a lot out. I mean, I was trying to summarize a very extensive process there. But you fight through that complexity to land in a place of simplicity where you can systemize, eliminate the things you don't need to be doing, systemize it, and come down to a clear, repeatable daily process where you can even systemize your day. In the morning, I do a couple marketing activities, then I take sales calls for 2 hours, then I do client fulfillment for 3 hours kind of thing, right? And the more systemized you can be, I think the more able you are to have a nice, simple process to scale your business.
Woof, Anthony. Hold on. I'm going to call this out for listeners, actually. Listeners, Anthony just laid out an entire framework in real time in front of all of us. So the good news is this is a podcast. It's not a live stream. Go back, re-listen to that answer from Anthony as many times as you need to, because this is the intentional work that needs to be done to set this up. And Anthony, I want to take back the analogy that I used earlier about demolishing this room that I'm standing in, because really the picture that I actually think you're painting is a car. And it's really that point that hammered it home for me at the end where you talked about fighting through that complexity the complexity to get to simplicity. I thought about a car and I'm just like, cars have so many thousands of parts that we don't understand. You've got the entire fuel system. You've got what's under the hood. And I feel like you just dismantled the car from the outside and you were like, let me show you the actual pieces that make this up. Let me show you the fuel, how you get customers into here. Let me show you what's under the hood, the actual engine that drives the business. And the reason why we set all of that up is because at the end of the day, a car is incredibly simple. It's why we have billions of people around the world, some of which who aren't the smartest, that are able to operate a 2,000 piece of machinery, because at the end of the day, it's a gas pedal, a brake pedal, and a steering wheel. And that's all that we have to manage. And so, Anthony, I absolutely love the way that you illustrated that for us. It begs the question, where do we go wrong in all of this? Because where I'm thinking as an entrepreneur is I'm like, I've seen people get shiny object syndrome where they don't have focus long enough to intentionally build this. When you talk about your own personal LinkedIn system, I'm like, Anthony, most people aren't willing to do the same thing day in, day out. There's something weird about the human psyche where we just won't find the thing that works and just keep on doing it. We have a tendency to overcomplicate things. So from your perspective, having worked with so many different businesses and so many different industries, so many different business models, where the heck do we go wrong in this process?
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a tough question, because there's a lot of places I think where businesses go wrong. Maybe I'll give you a quick answer, and then I have a little story that came to mind. So, persistence would probably be the number one thing that comes to mind, because what happens is, first of all, okay, so I'll go back a step even. First of all, most businesses they live in a place where they have all the stuff they want to change or update or modernize, and they know they're behind, right? There's a study that says 92% of CEOs feel they're currently behind, from KPMG. So, you're in this place where you perpetually feel behind and you want to get ahead, and you want to make these bigger changes, but you just never quite get there and you never quite do it. The first piece of advice is you bring in outside help. Like, stop thinking that you're going to figure this out for yourself. You need objectivity. First of all, you need someone who comes in who is not emotionally invested in the business, who hasn't been deep in the muck with you for all this time, trying to, make a million decisions. They can just come in and look at things clearly and say, okay, here's where this is all screwed up. Like, let's take a step back. Let's fix this, right? So you need to acquire that objectivity. You cannot acquire that objectivity internally, because everyone is in the muck together, right? I like to think of it as, we talked about incrementalism before, right? Which is the approach most companies take to change. Incrementalism is like a staircase, right? It's like taking the stairs to the top floor. It's a very slow step-by-step process. Holistic change is like taking the elevator. You can calmly proceed to the next level by having the courage to go through that holistic change. But what you really need to really do that properly is that objectivity. So if you think of your business as that building, right? You're inside, you can take the stairs, you can take the elevator to the top floor. What you really need is to put a helipad on the roof of the building, so that every once in a while, a helicopter pilot can come land on the roof, pick up the leadership team, take you up to 10,000 feet and give you a whole new view of your business and its surrounding environment. And that's, you can only get that objectivity by acquiring it externally, whether it's listening to your customers, as I mentioned before, bringing in outside coaches and consultants. It's one of the wisest things that you can do as a leader. Now, the second thing is persistence. It's, you kind of start this process maybe, and you kind of map out some stuff, but then you just get busy again and you just kind of leave it. And you just end up back in the same place. You got to fight through that holistic change. You got to fight through that complexity at least once. You have to transform your business soup to nuts, because if you do it once, and then you can shift back to an incremental approach for 3 to 5 years. The second time you go to do that, 3 to 5 years later, there's not as much things that need to change, because you've already done the really big change once. You're working from the foundations of a fully aligned organization. So the changes you need to make become smaller and simpler. So you can go through that holistic change process every 3 to 5 years based on what's going on with your business and in your external environment. And the first time you do it is the most resource intensive. It's the most complex, but you need to do it and, fight through it, fight through the complexity, bring in outside help. Those would be, my number 1 and 2 sort of tips, because you'll never get where you're going until you do that. It'll be the best investment you ever make. I think there's a quote from Warren Buffett. I might get this wrong. I think he says the best investment you'll ever make is an investment in yourself, or it might be the only investment that never fails is an investment in yourself, actually. And it's true. It's at some point you need to make that investment and pay for an outside coach or consultant and just do it, right? And assuming you choose the right outside help and the process works, you can completely transform your business in a way that will totally pay back whatever investment you made. So I have done that myself in my businesses many times, and I've been very careful about who I choose as an outside coach or consultant, and it has paid me back 10 times over. It's one of the best things that you can really do as a leader.
Yeah, Anthony, I want to come back because I knew that there was a story on your mind, especially when I was talking about the car illustration. As we come towards the end of this session, I want to squeeze that one last story out of you.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say, this is kind of a bit of a side point. It's very specific, but I think it's important. So I like to talk about aspirational positioning. So let's say you work through this holistic process. One of the things that should come out at the other side is for you to be positioning yourself far more aspirationally. And, there's a great quote, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. I absolutely love that quote. And I'll tell a quick story. So my first real job, this is kind of when I went corporate in my mid-20s. I got a job at a large ad agency called McKim, and George. It was kind of the biggest ad agency in my city at the time. And so I'd been there for a couple of weeks, and I was an account coordinator, and I got invited to go to my first client meeting. And I was told, okay, you're going to come to the client meeting, but just don't say anything. Just observe, just sit there, don't talk. I said, okay. And so we were all meeting at the elevators to go down, and there was about 6 of us, and I get to the elevators, and I was the first one there, and we're all waiting, and one of the VPs comes walking up. He was the last one to show up, and he walks up, and he takes one look at me, and he just looks me up and down, and he goes, is that what you're wearing? And I was absolutely shocked. I was mortified. I looked myself up and down and thought, what's wrong with what I'm wearing? I was wearing brown dress shoes, black slacks, and a patterned dress shirt tucked in. I thought, what's wrong with what I'm wearing? And the elevator doors open, and my feet were frozen to the cement. I was just totally frozen in time. And I actually had to fight just to get into the elevator before the doors closed, because I was emotionally ruined for the rest of that day. And I went home that evening, and I walked in the door of my apartment, and I didn't even take my shoes off. I just walked over and I stood in front of the mirror for about 20 minutes looking at myself. And I came to the realization that I looked like a child wearing his father's clothing. And my embarrassment grew stronger. And I think I took a pee, ate a mandarin orange, and I immediately drove to the mall and proceeded to buy myself an entirely new work wardrobe. And I thought, I never will I be seen this way again. And I think it wasn't long after that I actually heard that quote for the first time: dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And I immediately understood that, not only because I just went through a literal iteration of that quote, but, when you think of it in the context of business, I like to say, dress for the client you want, not the clients you have. Because too many businesses, let's say you work through this holistic change process and you come out the other end with a bit of a new vision and a bit of refined services and a more clarified dream client and market that you want to serve. And now you've repositioned your business around that. Be aspirational in how you position yourself. Do not position yourself based on what you do right now or what you're kind of doing. Look ahead, 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future. What is the company that you want to become? Position yourself around that and then pronounce it to the world. And the second you pronounce that positioning to the world, now it's time to live up to that. Right now, it's like placing a big new pair of shoes in front of you, and you have to step into them. And at first, that big new pair of shoes doesn't actually fit. You have to grow into it. But what happens is, as soon as you pronounce that to the world, this aspirational position, we are the world's leader at X, whatever it might be, right? Really aspirational. What happens is the pressure is on for you as a leader, for your employees. Now you have to go fast to live up to that, to become that aspiration. And it doesn't mean you're being dishonest, because you can say to your clients, why does it say on the headline in our homepage, we are the world's leading ... right? Because that's our vision. That's our goal. That's what we're building. That's what we're working towards. And your clients will be like, oh, okay. They will appreciate that. that you've painted a picture of where you're going and how that fits with them, right? So be aspirational when you position yourself.
Anthony, I can't tell you how much I freaking love that story that you shared with us. I'm so glad we snuck it in because you said the word aspirational. I think that touches on so many different components of what we talked about here today, that future looking. It's why it ties in your brand as well, Futurecraft Consulting. I love so many aspects of that story because it also is that intentionality. Hey, this is where I am today, but I'll tell you what, this is where I want to be tomorrow. And your analogy of growing into those shoes is so fitting here. It's just, yeah, I think that the overarching theme of today's show is going to be that aspirational, intentional, systematized growth. So I love so many components of all these things. I feel like, well, no, I know, Anthony, that this is just the tip of the iceberg into your business brilliance, all the different frameworks. And I wish that we could do an 8-hour-long podcast episode together. But with all that said, I know that listeners are going to be super eager and keen to check out your work online, all the awesome stuff that you're up to with Futurecraft, get even more brilliance from you, Anthony, inside of your books. So drop those links for listeners. Where the heck should they go from here?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Again, so first of all, I do a range of things. I work with larger B2B sort of enterprise clients, and I work with startups and founders, but really my bread and butter right now is working with agencies. So the first thing I would say is go grab a copy or sign up for the waiting list for my new book, The Agency Secret. It's not just relevant to agencies. It's relevant to, I think, anyone who runs a business. So go to theagencysecret.com. You can sign up for the waiting list there. Otherwise, you can check out my main site at anthonygindin.com as well. And you'll find links to everything from there. And that's kind of the two places where you can best find me. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, Anthony Gindin. That's where I post the majority of my content and thought leadership.
Yes, listeners, you already know the drill. We are linking to Anthony's book, his personal website, his personal LinkedIn, all down below, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So don't be shy. Legitimately check those links out. Drop Anthony a line to thank him for coming here on the show today and sharing so much of his brilliance with us. I'm mind blown. This, I knew it was going to be a fun session, and it absolutely blew the lid off of this. So thank you so much, Anthony. So listeners, definitely check out those links. Pick up a copy of Anthony's books. By the time this episode airs, it's probably days away or weeks away. So definitely don't be shy about getting on that wait list. Otherwise, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.